Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming along today. Welcome to everyone who has joined us on Zoomland. We had about 91 registrations, which is absolutely amazing. So, yes, thank you again. So I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And on behalf of me and all the speakers today, I pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So we'll do this acknowledgement of country once, and it is from all of us. So the plan for today. I will talk about our agenda, what we're going to be doing, and I'm planning to give a very brief introduction to the Care Economy Research Institute. Next, we'll have Kate Sear talking briefly about the Gender Law and Drugs program that she runs, and ARCHES, the Australian Research Centre in Sex, Health and Society. And then Tessa Zernzak is going to talk to us about the value and importance of engaging people who use care services in research. Then we turn to our main speaker, Professor Jo Neal from King's College, who you've all come to see today. So Jo's going to talk for about half an hour. We can flex, we can run into the afternoon tea time if we need to. I thought we'd have about 15 minutes for comments, conversations. I don't know, Stella might have something to add on this topic. How old's Stella? Oh, she'll definitely have something that she wants to say. And then after that, for everyone who's here, we'll go and have afternoon tea. I'm really sorry that I can't send afternoon tea to people on Zoom, but you know, the technologies are limited, especially in this Optus blackout period. So I hope everyone can hear. Please put a message in the chat if there's any IT issues. We are going to record this session today, and it will be posted on CERI's website eventually. So I'm just going to talk to you really briefly about CERI, the Care Economy Research Institute. It was launched this year and it's one of La Trobe's 2 flagship research institutes. Our vision is to improve people's health and wellbeing and to drive Australia's economic growth by breaking down silos in the health and social care sectors, which we know are a really rapidly growing part of Australia's economy. So we want to identify what impacts services and products in the care economy have for people, connect with industry partners to develop and trial models of care, collaborate across sectors and look at scalability and replicability of care models. We're interested in looking at the adoption of care technologies and evidence, and we will do so in conjunction with a lived experience advisory group that's being set up at CERI. And finally, we want to leverage La Trobe's research capacity and our industry partners' capability and capacity to advocate for system change in the care economy. So to do so, there are 5 domains of CERI. One domain looks at care technology, another at care workforce, one at care delivery, but the one that Lisa Brophy, who's just sitting there, and I are leading is the care experience domain. And we're interested in exploring how the lived experience of Australian consumers can improve the design and delivery of services to ensure both culturally appropriate and empowering models of care. So we're really hoping to grow research at La Trobe that will incorporate the views of people with lived experience of the care economy. So the final domain is care economics and social policy. Now, clearly these are all really overlapping, and any project is likely to be across more than one of the domains. So that was really brief because I don't want to take up time from the other speakers, but if you're interested in getting involved in CERI, if you're a La Trobe staff member, scan the black QR code. If you're in industry, or if you're from an industry or a non-government organisation that provides care, and you have an idea for a project or you'd be interested in working with La Trobe researchers, you can contact CERI via the red QR code. So on that note, I now might hand over to Kate. I'll just leave those scans up.
Yes, please do, that's fine. Look, yes, please do. So thanks, Sarah. Welcome everybody here and all of those of you who are joining us online. For those of you who I haven't met before, my name is Kate Sear. I'm the Acting Director of the Australian Research Centre in Sex, Health and Society, which is based here at La Trobe, or Arches as we call it for short. And this is a joint event today of Arches and CERI, so really proud to be working with Lisa and Sarah and Joe and everybody at CERI to put this event together. As some of you might know, Arches has a long and proud history of doing research with marginalised populations, particularly LGBTQIA+ communities and people who use alcohol and other drugs. Going right back to the early 1990s, where we've done research on issues around HIV, injecting drug use, hepatitis B and C, and so on. I'm really pleased to be a part of Arches and to lead a program there called GLAD, Gender, Law and Drugs. There's a lot of acronyms to remember, where we do research on issues to do with gender, law and drugs, as the name suggests, but it's not the only program that we have within Arches that does research on drugs issues. Dr. Adrian Farrugia, who can't be here in person today, runs another program within Arches called Drugs, Gender and Sexuality. And members of that team and Arches have had a long history of working with Joe Neal on a range of projects, and are really pleased to be able to host or co-host Joe today. So I'll hand over from there. I'll hand over to Tessa. Shall I? Yeah, thank you.
All right, hello, and thank you so much, Kate, for that introduction. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about consumer collaboration in the Australian context to kind of set us up to be ready to hear what Joe's going to share. Because I don't know that much about addictions, but I do know a lot about consumer collaboration in Australia, and it's not something that we're doing particularly well. So a study in 2018 of studies published in the British Medical Journal found that 1 in 10 studies included any kind of collaboration with consumers. In a systematic review of clinical trials, which I led with another, well, Richard Gray led it, but he put me first. We found that only 17 out of 325 clinical trials had any kind of consumer consultation. So we were looking in manuscripts for even if they just had a once-off consultation with someone with no impact, and we found only 17 met that base criteria. But often many of them went above and beyond. Well, many of that 17, so, you know, like a small handful. In another systematic review that we did just in nursing journals, we found no consumer collaboration. Now, this is quite disappointing because we know that consumers contribute a lot to research. And I'm a consumer researcher myself, and I found it to be some of the most rewarding parts of my job is being engaged as a consumer, but also working with other consumers to make sure that their voices are heard. So when doing consumer work, as you know, where you're the consumer, it's about a lot more than sharing experience. It's also about being in tune with, as much as it's possible for one person to be, with a kind of community knowledge and what other people are experiencing. So having that meaningful engagement with community is so important. But one of the challenges is that often, in my experience, people get brought through to do consultation, and then they don't hear how their consultation has impacted the research. They don't get necessarily any follow-up on really on anything. And in my experience of working with people, it's not really until kind of the 5th month that they really trust you and are really ready to get, you know, to tell you what you're doing wrong. When I've coordinated groups, it's really been fantastic. They've solved problems for me, like recruitment, but even just thinking of things that I might not have thought of, recentering the perspective. And it can be very challenging for consumer researchers to retain both the integrity that comes with bringing a consumer perspective while also fitting into what's required of you as an academic. And and so having another consumer group engaged really brings that additional perspective that's going to help you, help you to stay true to what your values are. Consumer groups can have ups and downs, and often, I get asked to do little talks about this sometimes. And people say things like, well, what about funding, or what about working with people who, we might understand to be difficult? it's worth it. It's really worth it. And if people get, sometimes people can be like not difficult, but they can disagree with you. And that's an advantage because it makes you think harder about what you want and recenters you in your values, but also is an alternative perspective that you can then bring forward to make sure that your research is actually going to be relevant. So with all of that in mind, I would like to hand over now to Jo, who's going to talk to us about her experience working, who's going to talk to us about her experience working with consumers. Thank you so much, Jo.
Oh, can I just add too, if you're on Zoom and you've got a question, please pop it into the chat and we will read it out for you. If you're in the room, we'll come around with microphones and we'll alternate between the Zoom room and the actual room. So over to you, Jo. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi everyone, it's great to be here. I'm literally only just off the plane yesterday, so I was just saying to people it's a shame that this talk wasn't at 11 o'clock this morning because I was on fire at 11 o'clock this morning and now I'm not on fire. But I am here to talk to you. Thank you for the introductions and for the Tessa for the warm-up. So we're going to talk about measuring recovery from alcohol and other drug use, a collaborative research study that we've been involved in. So I'm based at the Addictions Department at King's College London. You all know where London is, but you probably don't know where Windsor Walk is. We are based on Windsor Walk. So I Googled Windsor Walk to show you a picture and it popped up with 2 pictures and I will let it, leave it to your own imagination, which one is the Addictions Department. Okay, so some acknowledgements before I start. I'd like to acknowledge the NIHR Biomedical Research Centre for Mental Health at King's College London. It's a bit like your NHMRC, because they funded quite a lot of the research, not all of it, but quite a lot of the research I'll be talking about. All the participants and the service providers who've helped with the research, our service user research group, which you'll be hearing a lot more of during the presentation. The Aurora Project, which is a peer mentoring service based in South London. Action on Addiction, which is a charity that also funded some of the work that we're going to be talking about. Mindwave Ventures, which is the app developer, and then all my co-investigators, and particularly these 3 guys here. So this is Mel Getty, who's a member of our service user research group. This is Paul Lennon, also a member of our service user research group. And this is Alice Bowen, who's a research assistant and PhD student with me. And us 4 are the core team. We like to call ourselves the core SURE team around the work that's being presented today. So a little bit of background. I moved to the Addictions Department at King's College London in 2013. So I want to just transport you to the UK in 2013, where we were using the word recovery a lot, but as is still the case, poorly defined, quite contested, quite divisive. Probably not as divisive as it has been here in Australia, but certainly we've had our moments in the UK. A lot of controversy about what it is. Initially, people said it was abstinence. Very quickly, they moved on from that and realized that it was much broader than abstinence. But what we were starting to see was service providers being measured on how well and how good they were performing in terms of helping people to recover. But what was recovery? So we were really defining recovery through the policy, clinician, researcher kind of lens, and not really understanding what recovery meant to people with living and lived experience of substance use. So we set about doing a study. We wanted to see what recovery meant to people with experience so that we could measure it in a way that would be accepted and valued by people who were using substances, and also useful to commissioners, we hoped, and to providers. So that's a bit grand. I wouldn't really say it's a philosophy so much, but probably more a method of working. And we really wanted to be collaborative on this piece of work. So as I say, I'd moved to King's in 2013. The Addictions Department is based in the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience. So no surprises, there are a lot of psychiatrists, psychologists and neuroscientists. There are quite a lot of statisticians, and there are some health economists, some good health economists. There aren't many social scientists. and there certainly aren't many qualitative researchers, but there are one or two. But what we really didn't have was people with living and lived experience working with us on our addiction-related projects. I say addiction-related because obviously I'm talking about the addictions department at that time. The terminology obviously has changed and continues to change, as you'll see through the presentation. First example being our service user research group. We set up a service user research group. If we were setting it up now, I'm not sure we'd call it a service user research group, but that was the term that people wanted to use at that time. And basically the idea behind this group was the Aurora Project were friends of King's College London. They were a peer mentoring service based in South London. King's had the addictions department with a lot of researchers doing research on substance use. So I got together with the Aurora Project and we said we'd create a group of people with living and lived experience and we would focus on research. So the idea would be that the King's researchers could go to face-to-face meetings with members of Surge, as we decided to call ourselves, and take issues to them, take issues about recruitment, study design, whether or not the topic was worthwhile, any sorts of questions they liked, and Surge would provide advice in a sort of workshopy surgery format. So obviously that was great for the researchers, and we hoped that the people, members of Surge, would also get something out of it. So the aim was to give them information and training on research, and obviously, sorry, inflation, particularly in London, wouldn't cut it now, but it was £20 that we gave them for a 1-hour meeting. And they drove a hard bargain and said, that's fine, but you have to bring cake. So there was also lots and lots of cake at these meetings. And over, well, from 2013 until 2020, when the pandemic struck, we met once a month in South London, and Surge members became involved in quite a lot of research projects in the addictions department. They did some teaching, and we had a colleague who was very involved with the BBC, so they did some media work. So it kind of developed a bit of a life of its own. But the first study that they worked on was our study of developing a measure of recovery. So we set about developing this measure, and we wanted to use a type of development process that would be collaborative. So we were aware of patient-reported outcome measures, and as you might know, these are short, self-complete questionnaires, assessment scales, rating scales, and they're not specific to alcohol and other drug use. They're widely used across a range of health fields, and I think they specifically started after surgery with orthopedics. So how do people feel about their shoulder surgery? And the difference between these and other measures is that PROMs very much focus on the patient or the service user or the client perspective. So before they're actually developed, or as part of the early developmental process, you speak to people who are experiencing the health issue, and they give you guidance on what sort of questions to put into your measure. And then when you've got that right, you do some rigorous psychometric testing. Now, historically, the kind of consultation that people have done has been fairly limited, maybe a few focus groups to work out what questions to put into the measure. So we decided to take it to another level. Just in case you're still not quite sure what I'm talking about, these are a couple of examples of the kinds of measures that you can produce at the end of it. Okay, so you've got the gist. We set about developing our own patient-reported outcome measure that subsequently became known as SURE. So this is the team. We've got researchers. Obviously, we have to have some psychiatrists and psychologists in there, but we do have some social scientists, sociologists, and statisticians. And then, crucially, our partners every step of the way were our service user research group, working with us as the first project that we'd worked on together. And as I say, the funding for this initial bit of the work came from the Biomedical Research Centre. We didn't get a huge amount of funding. In fact, you'd be astonished at how little funding we got. So it took us a long time because we had to do it slowly, and we did it, a lot of it, additional beyond the day job. So let's go to what we did. We did a multi-method mixed-stage study. And as I say, we wanted to do quite a lot of early developmental work. We first put in the ethics application, and we had to do something whilst we were waiting for the ethics application. So we thought it'd be a good idea to ask 25 fairly senior clinicians and service providers what they thought recovery was. And they gave us a list of about 76 indicators covering 15 broad areas. So we had that as a starting point. Then we got ethics approval, and then we went to 5 groups of people with lived experience of alcohol and other drug use and said, okay, what do you make of these indicators? Do they chime with what you think recovery is? Is there missing stuff? And probably needless to say, they took the list apart. I mean, they really took it apart. They said that terminology was all wrong. They said that the measures, the indicators were contradictory. They said they made assumptions about people that weren't true. They said they were expecting people to be superhuman. So we had to go not quite back to the drawing board, but we did a lot of work with these 76 indicators to get them down to 33 that looked a little bit more acceptable. We then took the 33 indicators to another couple of focus groups with people with lived experience or expert panels, and they helped us narrow it down a bit more to 30 indicators that were slightly reworded. Then we mocked up what we thought the patient-reported outcome measure would look like, and we asked 8 people to actually complete it while we watched them so we could see what was going on. And from that, we learned quite a lot as well about what wasn't working. So we revised it again, and then we had a slightly better measure. We asked 40 people to complete it and tell us what they thought of it. Was there anything wrong with it? Was the stuff missing? Was the length about right? Went through the full shebang. We got it down to 30 indicators, tweaked a little bit, and then we got the statisticians in to help with the psychometrics. And we had people completing it in person and online. Some completed other validated measures, including the WHO breath and ARC, which is a recovery capital scale. Some of them completed it twice. And then just in case there are any statisticians in the audience, I won't give a rendition of the psychometrics that we did, but there were factor analyses done and all those wonderful things that I'm not going to bore you with just in case I get them wrong. And of course, our service user research group working with us at every step of the way. And that included often late night email exchanges about wording on questionnaires. So they were very, very involved at every step. So the final version of the measure has got 21 questions in it. Our group told us that SURE was the best measure, was the best name, standing for Substance Use Recovery Evaluator. It is quick and easy to complete, and it does measure recovery from dependence on alcohol and other drugs as perceived by people with living and lived experience. It has been psychometrically tested, and we never said and would never claim that it's the measure that you have to use or that you should ditch everything else you've been doing. We simply say use it alongside or instead of existing outcome measures if you think it would be helpful. If you're wondering what's in it, it's got 21 questions, as I say, covering 5 broad domains of substance use, self-care, relationships, material resources, outlook on life. So probably the obvious thing to say is only 6 of the questions even relate to substance use. So it is much, much broader than substance use. It's certainly not an abstinence-focused measure at all. It's very much wellness focused. That's what it looks like on paper. Kind of simple. The scoring system is just shown in the right there, so you can see it. Simple scoring system. That's what the self-care questions look like. So very simple, straightforward. The person who is in recovery or thinking about recovery should be completing it. We've got a bit of a tradition, unfortunately, in our services in the UK, whereby clinicians complete measures for people after they've left due to the time pressures that they're under. But this one must be completed by the person. That a professional can help somebody to complete it. And we ask people to think about the last week when completing the items. So you don't want to be doing it every single day, but maybe every week or month or 2 months. You can track your journey over time. Mel very kindly did a little self-help tutorial for anybody who wanted to complete it as well. We thought, or we hoped, that it would be used by patients or people using services to monitor and reflect on their own recovery. When we were doing the developmental work, we found that a lot of times when we asked people to comment on the questions, they would actually start to open up about all different things in their lives. So we found that the tool was actually opening up conversations that we hoped people with lived experience would appreciate, but also clinicians would experience and benefit from. And then obviously as researchers, we now have an outcome measure that we can use in our trials or other types of studies to measure recovery. But maybe because we kind of filled a bit of a void, and the actual uses have sure been much greater than that. And we had a lot of national and international interest. So in this year, we're aware of it being used in at least 30 countries. That's people who've told us they're using it. And many people, providers, again, we weren't expecting this, but for the providers asking us if they could use it within their own treatment and monitoring systems. If you think about the time shift from 2013 and now we're coming up to 23, we had a paper version when we published in 2016, and now people want it inbuilt into their electronic system, so we can facilitate that. And we've got international translations and validation exercises, so there's various language versions of it knocking around now, and we're aware of researchers using it. But the interesting thing was that people with lived experience then told us that they would like an app so that they could actually see the measure within an app, complete it themselves. So as part of our collaborative journey, that's where we went next. What was the point of having an app? So we wanted to help people track and monitor their own recovery journeys, recognize when they might need help, find information and support sources. And obviously the researchers in us still wanted to try and generate new data to better understand recovery and substance use. So when we developed it, again, developed in collaboration with Surge and people with experience, it was for people using alcohol and other drugs in recovery or thinking about recovery. So again, this is not an abstinence focused app. In fact, we've got a naloxone feature in there. So it's also got a harm reduction element to it as well. So continuing the collaborative nature of the work, when we picked an app developer to work with, Mindwave Ventures, they very much focused on co-design, which we soon learned was the IT equivalent of collaborative research, really. So in co-design, they were designing technology with what they called end users. So people who were going to be using the technology were working with them to actually develop products. So they were the people we worked with. We went with the co-design approach, and they had what they called a double diamond design process, and that had 4 stages that resembled the way we were working. So basically it was a very iterative process, the way that they developed things, including our app. So there were 4 stages. I'm not going to do this or we'll be here all night, but I just want to give you a brief indication of each of the stages. So you'll see like MW pop up on the screen. That's Mindwave. You'll see KCL. That's us, King's College London. And you'll see Surge. That's our service user research group. So we were all involved throughout the process. And in the initial stage, we did interviews to work out what people wanted in the app, what they thought of the idea. We checked out the ideas in workshops. And in the next phase, did a Moscow exercise, which I learned was a must-have, should have, could have, and will not have at this time, which basically meant we had to stick to the budget. So there were things that we wanted, but we couldn't afford, so we weren't getting them. We did a flow chart. We then started to develop the app, or rather the developers started to develop it. There were prototypes, initial designs. We got feedback on those, again, from obviously our service user research group members, more workshops to check everything out, starting to put together the content, because obviously we had this, the SURE measure, but that wasn't enough for a full app. So we needed other content. We also had to go through an ethics process, which was quite strange because we wanted to put research questions in, but we didn't really know what research we wanted to do. And then we got lots of test versions on a platform called TestFlight, where we test the app. And, you know, if I say we tested one version, we tested 50 versions. We really tested it. Then finally, we started to make progress. We got some final feedback and refinements. and we launched the app on Google Play and the App Store, free. The app is free, of course. We tested it so much that we were so anxious there'd be a bug in it that we didn't tell anybody. So we got it up there and we didn't tell anybody we'd actually got it live. So we just told family and friends and said, could you just check it for us just one more time? So after that, we then did a proper launch and started to tell people we had it. And if you're wondering what's in it, it's got the recovery tracker, so you can complete the SURE measure. You get some feedback, you get a score, and you can see your score on a graph. If you track your progress over time, you see your graph change. We've also got a sleep tracker in there. Now, I haven't got time to go into that today, but actually, once we've done the recovery measure between 2013 and 16, one of the things that came out of the research we've done was people said that nobody ever listens to you when you talk about sleep. Sleep's really important for people who are using substances or in recovery. So we also developed a second prong on recovery, on sleep problems. And that has also gone into the app, and you can complete that, get a score, and also track your feedback and your progress on your sleep problems. There's an artwork feature. If you want to submit artwork to the app, we can include it. A diary feature, so you can complete personal thoughts. Already mentioned the naloxone feature, where we actually did a little video, and you can actually put the video, you can actually watch the video. It shows you how to administer naloxone, and then various reading and resources, and then an opportunity to participate in research if you actually want to answer some research questions. Totally optional. 2020, we were just starting to disseminate, and we had a little existential crisis. We started to wonder why the app wasn't featured on the App Store, why it wasn't a bestseller. And then we started to wonder why we developed it, because we just basically done things intuitively. Were we disseminating it the right way? We hadn't used an implementation science framework. Should we be updating it? What were we going to do next? So once we were starting to have this at the beginning of 2020, along came COVID, and we were still having an existential crisis already. So by necessity, we turned to a lot of social media because obviously things had to be done online. We were lucky that we had connections with the UK Recovery Champion, who gave us some ideas about who to contact and tell about the app. We did a separate evaluation project, and we developed a network of champions. So these were people dotted around the UK who were themselves embedded in recovery communities, who were interested in the app and could tell people in their communities, a sort of snowballing out about the app. And we put in a hot topic feature to make it a little bit more interactive. So each month we would put a new topic in, ask people to submit any ideas or thoughts, and then we'd feed those back through the app. So we were just experimenting around a bit. In terms of the paper that we published from the research, again, it just kind of confirmed that, there aren't that many apps for people who are using alcohol and other drugs and think they have problems with it. It's not really a popular topic. It's not really something that's ever going to be a bestseller. So that's not the point of doing it. The point is that there are some people who want to use an app. So it's good that there are apps, and the more apps, the better. So people have got choice. We found that people had quite low expectations from the app, and they just came because they were curious, wanted to see what it was like, and often because they trusted the person who told them about it. And we also weren't convinced it was changing behavior, but what we did find was people saying that it lifted their mood, and they liked seeing the artwork, and they liked playing with it and fiddling around and getting the feedback. So it was actually having a beneficial effect, but it wasn't necessarily changing behavior. So the next stage, we did a little bit of a refresh, included some of the feedback we've got in a refresh version that came out just a couple of months ago, earlier this year. So it's now got reminders, because one of the things people told us was they forgot to complete the measures. So you can set a reminder function. You can share your scores with anybody you like, including your treatment provider. A little bit more usable, and we've got an option now to send push notifications. Please download it, you can have a look. If you're interested, it's still free. Feel free to download it, take a look. And also we have our online versions, our online media still going. And then just a final note. So we started off with collaboration, and that's the best place to end, really. What we discovered was that actually working on this kind of evolving 10-year project has really helped us to understand recovery in ways that we wouldn't have done otherwise. Certainly provided a lot of insight into the way people use measures in the real world. Made us think a little bit more carefully about our terminology and language over the last 10 years. And it's taken us on an unexpected trajectory and ongoing journey. Even, well, I say today, yesterday as it would be, Paul and Mel and Alice were out going to services in South London, talking about the app. I don't want anybody to comment on collaboration when I get the trip to Melbourne and they get the trip to South London. And we'll just skip over that. There are explanations. But also I think by developing it with people with lived experience, it's certainly increased the credibility. And we know from the feedback that trusting, because it has been developed, co-produced with people. And of course, critically, it's been so much more fun. And if it hadn't been fun, we'd have probably stopped going a long time ago. References to the slides, anybody can have the slides if you're interested. And then just to say, oops, perhaps a quick thank you. Just to say thank you very much for listening.
Thanks so much, Jo. Lisa, you're going to be on microphone duty. So can we start with questions from the floor? Has anyone got a question or a comment or want to say anything from the floor, and then we'll move to Zoom?
Thanks so much, Jo. It's really interesting. I just wondered on the last slide that you had where you, or one of those penultimate slides maybe, a final note on collaboration where you talked about the need to think more carefully about language and terminology. I would be really keen to hear a little bit more about that, and what in particular, if you can remember some of the things that came up that were particularly striking.
Yeah, okay. So I suppose the first thing is the word addiction. I mean, I'm based in the addictions department, and it's difficult not to use the word addiction when you're based in an addictions department, but increasingly we have moved towards substance use and alcohol and other drug use, substance use and alcohol and other drug use. And Paul still will say to me, thank you, Jo, for not saying misuse. So, you know, he's got that message across to us now. We don't use that anymore. There are much more subtle things as well, though, like when we were actually doing the developmental, well, let me first talk about the Service User Research Group. Obviously, the group named itself the Service User Research Group. Now, whether or not service user is the right terminology, nobody really knows. Many of the people that we work with are not using services. They're actually just people who are using substances. And so it's a slight misnomer, but it's a term that they still feel comfortable with, and so we still use. I think probably people here may wonder why we've used that term when we might talk about consumer research or peer research. We haven't. We're still sticking with service user research, and in fact, just recently we're writing a book chapter and was challenged actually by somebody in Australia on using that term, and decided we would still use it but put a footnote in now to explain. So that's kind of changed a little bit. In terms of the actual measure, when we actually got feedback on the items, bearing in mind these weren't our questions, these were items that psychiatrists and psychologists had listed for us. There were queries there about the language. There was queries there about the complexity of the language. So sometimes using terms like trauma, and people say, well, I don't know what that means. So there was quite a lot of terminology that we took for granted that actually when you think about it, people don't necessarily know what it means. So we are always cautious about simplifying language and explaining clearly what it is that we're talking about. And also there were some slightly judgmental comments made by those initial round that we take out. So there has been a lot over the time.
Got a question online, Heather.
Okay, so the next question is from Adam Bourne. Thanks, Jo. Really enjoyed the talk. I was interested to know whether the instrument was designed with or validated among LGBTQ communities, or if you have noticed any differences in how it has been utilised among this community. I'm mindful of the different prevalence contexts and norms that are often associated with drug use among LGBTQ communities and how notions of recovery could look and feel different? I'll leave you the question there in case you want to.
That is such a good question. I've never been asked that before, and actually never really thought about it before. So that is a really very good question. What I have thought about a lot is that obviously there are many populations who comprise people who use substances, and we try to be inclusive. So when we were actually developing the measure, we tried to include many people with diverse backgrounds, and I know members of the groups were from LGBT. Sorry, because the jet lag is from diverse communities. And so that they actually inputted into the measure, but we've never done anything specifically about testing it. And there are obviously many populations that we could take out. I mean, one thing that's always interested me is the extent to which, for example, if somebody's using cocaine and doesn't really consider they've got a problem, they're not going to use the measure and it won't really be relevant to them. So yeah, and I think it comes back to the existential crisis of trying to be inclusive and including everybody, but then perhaps losing your population. And one of the things that we had a big issue about was, sorry, Adam, because I'm moving away from your question because we haven't considered this, so I hope the broader context helps, is that we had some discussions about whether the app was very opiate focused, because obviously many of the people that I work with are working particularly in the field of opiates. So there wasn't enough alcohol content, and we've tried to redress that to be inclusive. And also now we've had questions about including gambling. But so you can be expansive, but then you still think, but then we're losing the focus. Who is it that we really are focused on for this? And maybe we just have to accept that there are limitations in what we could do, what we could realistically do, what we have done. And the challenge is to actually encourage other people to work in this space and do similar things.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much, Jo. That's great, and really enjoyed hearing about the experience of the journey for the collaborative research. I just wondered, from your experience being involved in it for so long, was there a particular time or part of the journey, the experience, that really you were quite surprised about, that really stood out, that might be something for us to stop and reflect on if we come across something ourselves?
I suppose parts that I probably alluded to already. I was surprised at how much interest there was in the Shaw measure, genuinely surprised. It wasn't like we had a big national programme grant. I mean, really, I called in some favours because we had so little money. I had research assistants and PhD students helping just because they were interested. So it wasn't like it was there was a big protocol and a big thing, and we thought it was going to be, you know, a big international measure. We were just experimenting, if you like, and trying to do something useful. So, I mean, we've been having a lot of contact with people in the States, and Utah State in particular have adapted it across all their services. And this has been ongoing for about 2 years, and they come back and they have conversations with us, and they take it really seriously, and they're embedding it in their electronic systems. So I think that has surprised me. And I think it was probably just being in the right place at the right time with the right type of measure. So that has definitely been the biggest surprise, I think. On the flip side, getting to the point where you've launched an app and then you suddenly think, why have we done this? What was the, you know, it was a bit of an unfortunate surprise, because it was like, I don't, you know, why have we done that? We just followed our instincts, if you like, and we just followed it. But I think probably that's not so bad sometimes. You know, it can take you unexpected places, and we are very proud of the app, even if it's never going to be on the App Store bestseller.
Just following up from that, because I suppose what that says, it was very targeted because it resonated and impact. And I suppose that was where I was also wondering, you were Shaw and you had research group at the end. So it was really people wanting to be engaged in the research or wanting to change what was out there. What would you say?
Can you
Yeah, so I know it's a bit complex. Yeah. So I was just reflecting on what you said. Obviously, it was a targeted project to be involved with. And in part, to me, that was also reflected in the word surge, which had research group.
Yeah.
So then I was wondering, to what extent was it that attracted people to be involved in research or to change what was happening out there?
Right,
And
I've got you. Yeah, yeah. So going back to 2013, so I'm not even quite sure where the idea came from or who came up with it. I don't want to claim it was mine because I can't actually remember if it was. But I do remember we went to the Aurora project, which I say is a peer mentoring service. And it was basically to have an exploratory meeting to see whether or not it would work. And I say the idea wasn't specifically to develop a measure at that point. It was to bring researchers together with people with lived experience. And Paul and Mel were there at the time in that meeting, and they were absolutely key and instrumental because they bought into it. And because they bought into it, other people were interested. So we would have these meetings once a month in person. And every month there'd be a group of about 14 people, and some would come some months and some would come other months. And it was all very relaxed and informal. And they said that they really enjoyed it. They enjoyed contributing to the research, but I think it was just a nice Friday afternoon ritual. And we didn't hold it at the university, we held it in the Aurora project place. So it was a familiar setting. So I think, yes, they were interested in research. Not unrelatedly, we're currently setting up a national network. And since COVID, it's been difficult to really, we lost the thread a little bit with the service user group because we couldn't meet. And many of the members of the group weren't interested in meeting online. So we're now setting up a national group. And it's been so nice that some of those original Surge members said that they would be back. And so this week we've had a meeting with people back on the call, and they are really interested in the research side of it. They're really interested in that, interested in the methods, interested in changing things, and committed and passionate about that. So definitely the research is an interest. Yeah.
We've got a question from Victoria Manning from Zoom. She says, excellent presentation. Thanks, Joe. So great to see it in an app now. How do you keep it updated in both content and iOS Google Play requirements? This is a very techie question. And have you secured ongoing funding for this?
So we're really lucky that Mindwave Venture, well, in fact, I think a lot of people see us as what's the word, like a good cause.
Yeah.
So people will do things for us on the cheap. And that includes the Mindwave, who are the app developer. They're a company, but they kind of get where we're coming from and they're very generous with us. And over the time, when we developed the app, we got a donation from Action on Addiction to actually do the developmental work. And various other people threw in bits of money. So we never quite used it all up. So when it came time to do the refresh, we actually had money still left in the budget. Not quite enough, but Mindwave Ventures were very generous with us and kind of, we had to wait a long time, but they did it under the cost. So we've been being able to kind of keep it going forward. We actually probably have an official end date at the end of this year when the money will actually be gone. But I think we're still interested in, we need the right reason to actually get some more money to do some more work. So the little bit of work at the moment in these final 2 months with Mel and Paul going out with Alice and seeing maybe what next. And that's hopefully be a way of actually getting some more money and getting the updates done again. But the last update, as I say, was fairly recent.
Have we got Marion?
Just a quick one. Congratulations, highly important, very relevant. We all want to know which interventions work and in which contexts. And of course, I'll read your papers, but can you shortcut us and tell us how, or if it's been, have researchers yet applied your app to evaluating interventions? Is that the word you use?
Yeah, so that's good. So there are 2 bits to that. The first is, yes, we know that some trials and some studies have put the measure into their outcome measures. And Pete Kelly from Wollongong University has used it a few times and elements of it as well, which has been really great to see. There's a second part to the question though, which is whether or not the app itself actually changes behavior. Does the app change behavior? That's something we would potentially like to explore, but that cannot be done on a shoestring budget with charity kind of, funding. We need proper money for that. But again, the qualitative research that we did recently indicates that it wasn't necessarily changing behavior, but It was changing how people felt. And that in itself is a good enough motivation. I suppose not everything is about having to change behavior. If it just lifts somebody on a day when they're feeling miserable, that's a win. It's a win. So that's the kind of first answer to your question, but it could be done. And we've done bits of it, but not enough for a systematic way yet.
I can jump in with a question now because we don't have any other ones on Zoom. I would love to have been a fly on the wall when people talked about what constituted recovery, because that's such an interesting, what makes recovery a great concept and also hugely problematic. How did you, I'm sure that there were diverse views on what recovery would look like. How did you incorporate that into the measure?
I think that was done through the iterative process. So obviously, it seems quite strange to say you've got a measure developed for people who are using substances, and you start off with psychiatrists and psychologists. Yeah. And that was actually just a practical decision because we had to do something whilst we were waiting for ethics. But in fact, it provided a very good starting block, and it did help shore people up. Because, sorry, no pun intended, though, it did help shore people up. Because they could legitimately look at these items that psychiatrists and psychologists had developed. And it brought them together because you could see that they did agree on things, that language was not appropriate, that assumption was not correct, that it was expecting the impossible of people. So we actually found that, but also, and I think it was Paul in one of the groups had said, how people are often non-judgmental in a situation like that. So they're very happy to say, I don't agree with that. That's fine. That's a different view. So people were very happy to disagree as well when differences of opinion did crop up.
Renee? Are you able to yell, Renee? No, it's best for the people. Oh, yes, of course, the people.
Actually, just to follow on from Sarah's, just like thinking the other way around, that of course there'd be some stigmatizing assumptions in researchers' work, but the same can also, I was wondering how you might have handled, consumers are like researchers, like people of the world, so their understandings of recovery are also sometimes made up of stigmatizing ideas. Just because people have lived experience doesn't mean it's free from stigma, I suppose, or free from misconceptions. I'm thinking of, work I've done with men in recovery who were in 12-step, and for them it was very helpful to think about needing a higher power and being powerless and being addicts forever. And they're not necessarily things we would want to put into an app, maybe. So I'm just wondering if the other way around, there was this filtering out of the kind of assumptions of researchers through this process, but was there ever a time when you had to manage some kind of interesting ideas coming up from consumer, and maybe more broadly in this process? Like, what do you do when you're getting, ideas back from consumers or, representatives, people on advisory panels who are also like us reproducing, a whole mixture of ideas, and sometimes that aren't as helpful as others? That was a bit of a ramble, excuse me, you know what I'm getting at.
I know exactly what you're getting at, yeah, and we did. So as I said, we started off with the psychiatrists, the psychologists and the workers, and they came up with some things that people in the consumer groups found to be offensive, but not everybody. So a good one here was spirituality. So spirituality came out as one of the domains of interest from the professionals. Now, spirituality is very high amongst some people in terms of recovery, but not all. So there was that, and there are other issues, particularly around sort of offending behaviour as well, that raised exactly the issue that you're talking about, where there was a difference of opinion. And what we decided was we couldn't have anything that was really divisive. So if people just did not agree on it, we couldn't include it because it would upset people. So the spirituality went out of the measure. Anything relating to criminal behaviour went out of the measure. So it was basically done on a way that if there were things that were going to upset people, we didn't want that. There had to be, the items in the measure were all very much broadly things that people could agree on and did agree on. And if there were differences of opinion, filtered them out.
Last question.
One last question, please.
Oh, that's great. Jo, maybe you're going to explain to me how proms work now. and I've seen lots of different examples of them, but I'm very interested in you choosing just 1 week in the context of people with what can often be very episodic conditions and situations where they can have a very bad week and they might have a series of very bad weeks, but they might have had a really good one. How is that kind of way of completing the measure managed?
Yeah, so we did think about the time period, and we did settle on a week. Now, the various reasons for settling on a week escape me at the moment, but certainly one of them was, memory issues and thinking back. And, especially if you are using substances, what you can remember over the last week. We've also got, of course, slight issue that the measure was developed by people in the community. And obviously, if you're in a residential setting or if you're in a custodial setting, some of the questions can be addressed slightly differently, because obviously you're not managing money if you're in a prison or if you're in a residential setting. So that's a slight limitation, and that was not insignificant when thinking about the time frame. But basically, the way we get around it is that we want people to get a snapshot of how they are over very recently, but then they can complete it. If you're asking people to think about the last month, you've got to wait a month before you ask them to complete it again. If you ask them about the last week, it's kind of a nice time period that a week later they can complete it and see things changing fairly quickly, but not if it's just 1 day, that's even more, subject to ups and downs. So it was a considered decision, yeah.
Or you had 2 authors on your paper. Were any of them the lived people from the Surge, or is that a potential future?
That is very interesting, because on most of the other publications, we've got a team of people, including people with lived experience. When it came to the research paper, and we did think long and hard about this, but in reality, the research was done during COVID. It was done through telephone interviews, and with limited access to service user involvement. So it was really Alice and I who did the research. So it seemed inappropriate to actually offer authorship to other team members who really had not been involved. But it does stick in my throat when I see it up there. So anyway, thank you for kind of raising it, because it gives me an opportunity to explain that because of the circumstances and the way that research was done, it was just Alice and I. But also we were asking people about the app. And again, we needed to be dispassionate insofar as possible, because we wanted people to be critical. We really wanted them to tell us what didn't work so we could improve it.
Okay, we're just almost at 3. Well, we are at 3 o'clock. I'd really like to thank Jo for talking to us so cogently through her jet lag. You would never have known. It's also really fabulous.
Apologies to Adam.
Oh, did you? You did well. It's also really fabulous to welcome a fellow social work researcher too. So that's especially exciting. Thank you very, very much to Kate for co-hosting this with us, and to Tessa for giving us a fantastic perspective on consumer participation in research, to Lisa for wielding the microphone so deftly, to Seri for helping fund this, and especially for Gail for helping out with all the IT stuff. And yeah, it would have been a mess without you, Gail, so thank you very much for that. And thank you very much for everyone who's joined us on Zoom as well. So we have afternoon tea in the foyer for those who are here, and I think we will close down the Zoom meeting now. Thanks again. If we could just give Jo a clap.